Today on CityCast Boise, Trump threw his support behind Governor Little, even though he's not officially running yet, as Idaho gets cozy with ice. Meanwhile, a housing report ranked our city as one of the worst for affordability and access. But is our market truly in trouble? And if you're looking for a way to escape reality, we've got just the place for you. It's Friday, June 13th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. Happy Friday once again, and joining me this week is political scientist Charlie Hunt. Thank you for being here, Charlie.
Happy to be here as always.
It feels like there's almost never a week where there's not something political we're talking about. So I'm really glad you're here again because there's more Trump to local news that I definitely want to pick your brain about. And it's kind of a two-part story where Trump publicly announced that he was backing Idaho Governor Brad Little for re-election, even though Brad hasn't announced that he's running yet. And then Governor Little ordered the Idaho State Police to assist ICE in transporting undocumented immigrants out of Idaho. I have a lot of questions about this story, but I think I want to jump first with, why would the president endorse Governor Brad Little when he hasn't even announced his candidacy for the next election cycle?
It's a good question. I mean, I think, we've all been sort of debating here in Idaho about whether Little is going to run for a third term. He has not really indicated one way or the other. And, there are not any sort of major Republican challenges to him yet in the primary, similar to what there were in 2022 when his own lieutenant governor, of course, our old friend Janice McGeachin, ran against him. Though, Governor Little responded to this endorsement, his complete and total endorsement, as Donald Trump always says in his endorsements, basically saying it's an honor to have the support of President Trump and Idaho will continue to make America great again, things like that. But he did that without confirming one way or the other whether he was actually running again. And I'm sure, Little is happy to have this endorsement. One thing we know about endorsements is when they're done early on by people who really matter, and I think in this case, if we're talking about Idaho, an endorsement from President Trump does matter. They can scare away potential challengers, right? Particularly coming from Little's right. And the only, real challenge Little was ever likely to get in this race, should he choose to run, would be from the right in a primary, as he got in 2022.
And that's kind of what I was wondering is, I love Idaho. I live in Idaho. I'm guessing that's not like the top of Donald Trump's mind at any given time. So it seems like there had to have been some kind of a conversation, some kind of a maneuvering or effort for this endorsement. So could this potentially have been a soft launch by Governor Brad Little to see what the response would be?
Potentially, yeah. I think it's unlikely that this endorsement was made completely without his knowledge. But it's also, Little may want to have this in his back pocket as he's continuing to consider, or maybe he knows he already wants to run, but he wants more time maybe to not have to deal with the campaign, to focus more on governing in whatever way he wants to govern before having to sort of dive into election year politics, a year and a half before the actual election is happening. Again, obviously, the primary is the more important one, and so we're less than a year away from that, for Little anyway. But maybe, this is a way for him to not have to worry about a primary challenge as much as you would think, and also, continuing to govern in the way that he wants to govern. But the other thing here, maybe he is still considering, Governor Little is 71. He would be 72 next year during the primary. He is getting older. He has done 2 terms. And although he's not term limited, maybe he does decide that it's time to step down, but he may want to be assured that he's going to have a successor that sees things the way he does. And in Idaho politics, that's not always guaranteed.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering if potentially this was a way to get some of the heat off of him for some of his vetoes this last session. I mean, there were some things where he did actually know how to use the veto and did use it against the far right in a couple of issues. And I wondered if this was a way to take the heat off, potentially going into next session, next January, where it's like, hey, Trump endorsed me. I'm the guy he supports, so don't come at me.
Yeah, I think that's potentially the case. And I think it's important to note here, right, that, Trump as a political figure in Idaho, he's increased his share of the vote for the presidency in Idaho each time he's been on the ballot. So he got 59% in 2016, he got 64% in 2020, and he got 70% this past year in 2024. Even in a red state like Idaho, that's a pretty significant jump. And so, that tells me Trump is very popular here, and his word carries a lot of weight when we're talking about endorsements. Of course, we may remember that just a few years ago in 2022, Trump also gave Janice McGeachin, in that case, his complete and total endorsement to be the next governor of Idaho, using like almost the exact same language as he did in this endorsement for Governor Little, saying that she will never let you down. That's exactly what he said now about Little. But in that case, Little beat McGeachin pretty easily in the primary, 53 to 32%. And that's a decent showing for a second place person against an incumbent, but it wasn't that close. And then Little coasted to re-election in the general election. So, maybe now at this point, as a re-elected president who's very popular with Republicans and feeling very powerful at the moment, maybe Trump's word carries a slightly different weight than it did back in 2022 when we were still sort of in the aftermath of January 6th and he was less popular back then.
Yeah, I did think that was interesting how he said in all caps, he will not let you down about Brad Little. And just from my perspective as an Idahoan, that's absolutely an untrue statement from Trump. I have already been let down by Governor Little many times. So I do want to make sure that we jump into this ICE story as well, because Governor Little did say that the Idaho State Police will be using resources and personnel to assist ICE in transporting undocumented people out of Idaho. And up until this point, Governor Little's been pretty silent about this. There hasn't been a lot of discussion from the Idaho executive branch about what is happening with ICE. So in your perspective, what maybe shifted, or why is this being brought up right now?
We're sort of recording this in the midst of this major conflict kind of going on right now in California and Los Angeles, where there's obviously major friction between the president and the governor, in that case, a Democratic governor, Gavin Newsom, about state power versus federal power, getting the military involved. And, that's a situation no governor wants to be in, probably. And in Little's case, obviously he's more on the same page with President Trump on the issue of immigration and probably is in line with his agenda a little more. On the other hand, I think it's, one thing all governors tend to like is control over the situation within their own state on basically any given policy issue. And so even if you're aligned with the federal government, with the president on these issues, maybe offering that assist or giving, whether it's a symbolic or sort of an actual practical assist on immigration, that can maybe breed some trust and you get in a situation maybe where the federal government will give you a little more leeway in how you're handling the situation. Maybe that's something that Little would prefer rather than having ICE itself really come in and kicking down doors and taking total control of the situation like they are in other blue states. And then that creates major conflict between the state and federal government.
I'm really curious if you have more information about this. I was looking. The initiative specifically says that it will allow the state to transport, quote, dangerous illegal alien criminals from Idaho jails directly to ICE detention facilities. And there is one in Jefferson County that it seems like that's where they would be transported to. Is there any clarification on what constitutes dangerous in this case? I mean, is this a misdemeanor weed possession? Is this a felony? Like what constitutes that?
I mean, I'm not sure in terms of, specifically what this directive is meant to cover. I think in some cases, these directives can be left kind of purposely vague so that it can be up to the discretion of law enforcement to decide what dangerous criminal alien or whatever the language you use means. There is this distinction that's been talked about a lot recently about, uh, focusing on folks who are maybe undocumented or here illegally, but who have criminal records or who have committed crimes while they've been here or before they've been here, compared to some of these ICE arrests that we've seen of folks whose only crime here is crossing the border, but who otherwise have been sort of, model citizens and things like that, but they're getting scooped up too. And so maybe specifying things like dangerous and criminal and these other things, problematic though those terms may be, are ways for, the governor and for law enforcement to sort of keep the focus on those folks. And that if they're doing enough in that category and making those transfers and cooperating with ICE in that way, then maybe there is not this additional interference or chaos around, breaking up families and a lot of the things we've seen in other states, especially because of, as you and I have talked about before, Lindsay, like the immigrant population here, especially in the ag community, is really crucial to Idaho's economy and to like our way of life. And the economy has been Governor Little's, main thing this entire time, that we have a good economy, and he doesn't want to jeopardize that either. So I think, as with the endorsement thing, like he's got a lot of irons in the fire right now, and it's this interesting kind of political balance he has to, weigh between pressure from the federal government that he mostly agrees with, and then on the voters' side and what's going on in his state that he probably has a better idea about than Donald Trump.
Okay, Charlie, I've got more bad news for the people of Boise. One of our least favorite things in the entire world happened this week. We were compared to Portland. And found, I know, and it was found we were just slightly less bad in the housing department than Portland. And that's a tough thing for the Boise ego.
At least we're not number one, I mean, Boise, I feel like we're always on a list of some kind, like always. The number of lists. And sometimes it's like really good lists. Like we love it when we're on most livable lists, but we also don't love it because we don't want more people moving here. It's very confusing.
I know. Well, this might be a good one for everyone who's trying to say like, wait, whoa. Like maybe slow your roll in coming to Idaho, because Portland was ranked the worst for housing due to its lack of available housing and unaffordability. But Idaho was not far behind. Like Boise had the second lowest vacancy rate of only 4.56% and had the fourth largest growth in its value to income ratio, meaning we aren't making enough money to be able to afford housing, or housing prices rose, but not proportionately to wages. And It feels like that's a constant conversation in the Valley. Like, are you hearing that too? Because I feel like the circles I'm running in, that is always a topic of conversation.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think whether it's renting or buying, prices, even in the short-ish time that I've lived here, about 6 years, have really skyrocketed. It's interesting to sort of remember, like, whenever people think about Boise, or whenever I'm describing Boise to other people, there's this question of like, oh, is it like Austin was 20 years ago, or is it like Portland was 10 years ago? And then the implication is that, 10 years from now or 20 years from now, Boise will be in the exact spot that those cities are. I think that's like a flawed assumption. I think a lot depends on not just where we are now with housing, but what happens next. Housing prices, like this is not something, at least we can see, that's unique to Boise. Like housing prices have been rising in SF, in Seattle, in Portland since, well before 2020 when I think there was a lot of conversation around Portland and what it was becoming as a city and, where it would go from there. And so these long-term trends have been really, I think, impactful for all of these Western cities, including Boise. And so I'm not necessarily surprised that we are in a similar spot on that list as Portland.
Yeah. Do you think that, I mean, like Boise has changed zoning codes and they're trying to address this issue. Do you think that because we're aware of it, because, we've had such a massive shift in demographic in just a couple of years, which is unique, I think, because of the pandemic, because of a lot of factors where we had so many people moving in so quickly, that we're very aware of this and want to react to it as opposed to a gradual change? Or do you think this is just, we're kind of stuck and we're going to be digging ourselves out of this?
Yeah, I tend to agree with the former point. Like, I think it's not all bad news. Like, because there's two different things here. There's how difficult it is to find housing now, affordable housing, right? And it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And there's how difficult it could be in, say, 3 to 5 years down the road. And I think that second question is going to be based much more on what these metro areas, whether it's Boise or Portland or wherever else, what these metro areas are doing right now to create more housing. And so, in this report that you mentioned, one of the quotes I thought was interesting was, quote, "Unfortunately, this isn't likely to change in many of the most troubled metros because the data shows that insufficient building is being done. That's not the case in Boise, where new permits are among the highest in the nation, but it's the case in Portland, Bridgeport, Connecticut, and these other metros with similar rankings." And so a lot of these other places, right, we may be in as bad a situation right now as them, but down the road, I mean, my judging based on how difficult it is to drive through the city of Boise right now with all the construction going on is that, like, we are building more housing and we do have more, new building starts than some of our peers in the West.
Absolutely. Well, and what always follows on the heels of this conversation is housing is so expensive here. There's got to be a crash. There's got to be something's got to happen. Housing's too expensive. So I actually reached out to Michael Miller with Homefound Group. We've had him on the program before, and I asked about that because these prices are really expensive compared to wages. Wages haven't necessarily kept up. I asked him what his thoughts were, and he said, "We are definitely seeing more cancellations from people who were potentially buying homes than we used to, potentially due to concerns about tariffs or recession. And prices are slated to go up in the Boise metro area. I do think there will be a few markets where prices do start to drop, but for a national housing crash, there would need to be a massive influx of foreclosures. But with the amount of equity in homes in America right now, foreclosures are actually at an all-time low. The overall moral of the story is that the power is shifting into buyers' hands, and they are being very particular." So it doesn't sound to me like this means a crash is coming. I think it's just, it sounds more like a supply issue.
Right. Like, the demand is there. And I think the other thing we have going in our favor here in the Treasure Valley is that we have so much continued growth and opportunity that there is still, economic opportunity being created even while the housing shortage is still affecting us. And that at least creates the opportunity to build more housing starts. We have more space than a lot of these other metros that have been around and established for a longer time and are denser and, surrounded by more sort of suburban areas. And so I'd still rather be Boise than Portland, even if we were first instead of second on that list. The way I think about this too is that housing is one of those things like education that has a sort of silver bullet quality to it. Like, where if you can figure that out as an individual, like trying to make it in this world, if you can get that under control and going in the right direction, it has huge downstream benefits for people who live in a certain place. Like, if you can stabilize your housing situation, if you can get that to an affordable place, then you're in a better position to find a job, meet people, start a family, and all those like really basic things that we typically associate with a good life or the American dream or however you want to put it.
I think it is reassuring, and we're kind of on the same page that it's not all bad on the housing front. And so, heading into picks of the week, what are you looking forward to this weekend, or what caught your eye this week?
So for my pick of the week, Lindsay, I'm going to give a plug for the West Valley Humane Society. So this is the main animal shelter for Canyon County. It's located in Caldwell. And this branch of the Humane Society, it's faced a pretty tumultuous few years in terms of its finances. It's the second largest animal shelter in the entire state. And its financial strains hit a peak last summer. Since then, they've managed to hold on with a little bit of help, but they really do need more help in order to serve the community in the way that I think we typically expect from animal shelters. So there was a story in the Idaho Press and on KTVB recently about this, that they've had a couple of longstanding issues that the shelter's trying to navigate. So it's independent of Canyon County, and it's only partially funded by by local municipalities like Nampa and Caldwell. But it has contracts with the county as well as those cities to provide sheltering services, which is great, except that the funding for West Valley Humane has not really kept pace with the growth of these areas like we just have talked about, right? So all the shelter can really do these days is take in strays and put them up for adoption. And that means they can't provide a lot of the services that better funded shelters provide, like veterinary services. So, for example, I volunteer from time to time at the Idaho Humane Society on Bird Street in Boise, near the Walmart. And they do an amazing job, including vet services, so they can nurse animals back to health and put them in a better position to get adopted. But at this point, West Valley Humane is kind of just trying to stabilize and meet the needs of their city and county contracts.
So how can people get involved, or what specific services are they looking for that maybe people could help with?
So you can check out West Valley Humane Society if you're looking to adopt a pet and you live in the sort of Caldwell, Nampa area. Or if you aren't, then I hope folks might consider donating to help them stay on their feet. And you can go to westvalleyhumanesociety.org to do that. And there you can also look at some truly adorable pictures of some adoptable pups and cats. And, I have two very sweet little dogs, Penny and Rhodey. Rhodey is a rescue, and he is the light of my life. So big life changer. So I would strongly recommend it. And I've really loved my time volunteering for IHS. You can walk the dogs, get to know the dogs, do care and feeding, all different kinds of things. They always need volunteers. And it's a great way to help out and get to spend some time with some really adorable pups at the same time. And cats too.
Maybe if you're on the fence about adopting, it's a good way to test it out, see how you feel about it. Kind of dip your toes in before you make the leap.
Absolutely. All right, Lindsay, what's your pick of the week?
Okay, so a couple of months ago, you had a pick of the week that was recommending Realms Arcade in Boise, and my family went. We had an amazing time. So I wanted to return the favor and recommend VR1 Arcade in Meridian. And it is actually the biggest VR1 arcade and the most dense amount of games in the Pacific Northwest, and one of the biggest VR1 arcades in the entire country. So they have 24 VR stations, which are just these individual little pods where you just have your VR headset. You can play with other people around you, or you can just play by yourself. But they also have these 12 custom-made arcade cabinets that have basically every video game that was made from the 80s to now. And my kids were playing all kinds of games, Aladdin from the 90s. They were playing that, the old Donkey Kong, fantastic games. And then kind of what I thought was the coolest thing there is they have a VR arena where we could go all the birthday party was able to go play together this VR game in this arena. And they also have this kind of arcade, so you can play these arcade games in this arena, or we went as a family and you can play it was this cooking game, this chef dash game where we're all trying to work together and finish the goal and not let the time run out. And it's just so much fun. You can rent by the hour, you can do a day pass. They have monthly memberships. Anyway, it was an absolute blast.
Oh man. So this is really, I can't wait to check this place out. It sounds, I mean, in a way, it's like, it's different from the traditional kinds of places I've gone. So like you said, I mentioned Realms a few weeks ago. And before that, my place before it closed was Space Bar in Boise. And those places really specialized and specialize in like the old style, like big arcade cabinets from the 80s. And then they have some pinball.
Yeah.
And then and a couple of other things, but that's about it. This place, it sounds like there's like with these cabinets, they have this huge variety. And then also, I mean, this VR element, which, I mean, I feel like I'm always admitting things I've never done before on this podcast, but like VR is one of them. I've never worn a VR headset in my life.
Really?
And it sounds like this might be the place to do it.
Okay, it is so cool. And they are so knowledgeable. Like the people who work there, you can tell this is like their passion. This is what they love, because they are super knowledgeable and they'll just jump in. They're like, oh, here, let's get this fixed. Let's get this. So like, it's super, you don't have to know anything.
I really like that it has kind of the balance. It has both like the nostalgia factor of being able to play these old games, or if you have kids, like introducing your kids to the games that you played and things like that with these cabinets, but then also the futuristic side with VR. So great pick, Lindsay. I can't wait to check it out.
Well, Charlie, thank you so much. I can't wait to hear about the fun you have at VR1 Arcade in the future when we chat again. And I hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks, Lindsay. You too.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. The show is produced by Evelyn Avitia, Frankie Barnhill, Francisco Kilgore, and me, Lindsay Van Allen. Blake Hunter writes our Hey Boise newsletter, and our music is by Up Is The Down Is The and All The Kimonos. If you enjoyed our show today, leave us a review. It helps other people find us. We'll be back on Monday with a look at Idaho's Democratic Party. Catch you then.